More than 1,400 men and women have lost their lives in the war in Afghanistan.
But the total wounded in action far outweighs that. More than 15,000 soldiers have returned wounded from the war. Their road to recovery can be long and hard. Such is the case for Master Sergeant Doug Reed of Jackson, Ohio. We want to caution you, some of the photos you will see are graphic, but we feel it's really important to show you what Master Sergeant Reed and his family have overcome. 10 TV's Glenn McIntyre has this story of a hero's healing.
Like he does every Wednesday, Doug Reed walks the 3 blocks from his home to the Jackson Firehouse.
We have a Wednesday night work detail. We got anybody started yet?
Nothing unusual about the city's fire chief putting in hours at his department.
So that's squared away. Business as usual, yes sir.
Until you hear the remarkable story of how he got here and how by every account, he shouldn't have.
Every bone in his face was pretty much crushed. 50% of the floor of his mouth was completely gone.
When she took her vows 29 years ago, Jana Reed knew the man she was marrying wasn't the retiring type.
He said, you know, I've always wanted to be a firefighter. As a little kid, I always wanted to be the Army man and be the firefighter.
And that's what Doug Reed did. 10 days after his wedding, he left for 8 months of basic training. 7 children and 26 years later, Doug, now a member of the Ohio Army National Guard, was leaving on his first combat mission, headed for war-torn Afghanistan.
And deployment was the hardest thing I'd ever done in our married life. And he gave me a hug, and I was crying, and he said, I'll come back to you, I promise. That was the hardest I'd ever cried in my entire life, was the fact that he was gone.
It would be the last time she would see her husband as she knew him.
My initial assessment was he's not going to make it.
April 11th, 2010, Master Sergeant Doug Reed and his unit encountered this roadblock in the Afghan village of Poli Kamri when they were ambushed.
We came under attack from 3 sides.
There was RPGs bouncing across the ground, machine gun fire everywhere.
Sergeant Ty Henry says the unit was returning fire when the call went out.
Over my headset, I heard man down, man down.
He turned and saw the man he calls his best friend, Doug Reed, had been hit by a rocket-propelled grenade.
An RPG actually bounced down the road that we were on and came up at an angle and basically glanced off his plate carrier and hit him in the face.
The team medic, Henry, ran to Reed's side.
The force actually took off essentially everything from here down to include exposing all the vasculature of his neck, his airway. I looked at Captain France and I said, he isn't going to make it. It was completely grievous, completely, you just don't expect people to survive things like that.
They couldn't get him into a vehicle because his injuries were just too extensive. And the only option they had to on these Humvees was they put him up on the hood and then Ty covered up, laid on top of him to cover him up till we can get him out of the kill zone.
These stunning photos show Ty Henry pinning Reed to the hood of a moving Humvee for the 6-mile trip from the ambush site to the nearest medical unit.
Physically, it was a difficult thing to keep him on the hood, and mentally it was, there were a lot of things going on there that, your mind's going 10,000 miles an hour and you don't have time to think about emotion or what ifs. One thing I did think was, hey Doug, you can't stop here, man. You gotta keep fighting, because how in the world are we going to tell your family that this happened? You got 7 kids at home. You can't afford this. Your family needs you. And that's one of the things that I was yelling at him about on the hood of the truck. I did quite a bit of yelling at him because I figured he needed it.
While the surgical team worked to save Reed's life, First Sergeant Michael Burris did the only thing he could think of to help: cleaning his friend's blood from the Humvee.
Doug was my roommate. He was my battle buddy, and so it was my job to clean that up. So I took care of it and then got the vehicle where the guys wouldn't see it. I was praying and crying and everything all at the same time, because it's just like, it is like I'm hoping I'm not washing Doug away.
That day was so innocent, it was so beautiful, it was a spring day.
Jana Reed remembers vividly the day and the phone call.
The first sergeant got on the line and he said, ma'am, this is First Sergeant Fish and I have Chaplain Size Moore with me. I said, stop right there. I said, how bad is it?
Her husband was alive, but had suffered near catastrophic injuries.
So everything here was just smashed, and the impact of that. So all of these bones here, the mandibular bone, the lower jaw, the upper jaw, everything was gone.
Doug was airlifted out of Afghanistan and was eventually flown to Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas. It would be 7 days before she would be able to see him.
He was obviously swollen, but his eyelids weren't purple. He didn't look grotesque, and I was just so relieved to see him.
The next day, she saw him without the bandages, and in his horrific injuries, incredibly, she saw hope.
You could actually still see his jugular vein, and the blood was coursing through it, and you could see it pump, and I just thought, thank you, God. Another millimeter, and it would have been all over.
But Doug's crisis was far from over. His doctors prepared Jana for the worst.
I didn't tell the kids, I didn't tell anybody that what the doctors told me, that it was that serious. They knew that it was serious, but I didn't tell them that the doctors didn't expect him to live.
Even after he opened his eyes, he was unresponsive, unable to communicate, and for nearly 2 months, unable to remember anything.
Typically a person will stay in it about 4 or 5 days, but his total time was 55 days. So they didn't know if he would come out of this amnesia state, and if he did, what kind of a person is he going to be able to be. And I just kept thinking, I don't accept this. This is not who I think my husband is. I think he's in there. I just prayed that God would give us some kind of sign just every day to keep me moving forward. And he did. Every day there was some little miracle that I knew that Doug's in there and somehow he's going to get out.
7 weeks after the ambush, when Jana brought their children to see him for the first time, Doug had a breakthrough.
We didn't know, is he in there? Oh, the lights are not on. Is anybody home? And when he went up to them and he called them their pet name, like Baby Girl and Saber Man, it was just so exciting for all of us. And we all began to cry because it was confirmation. He's really in there. It was almost like he'd never left.
Recovery didn't come quickly or easily.
He was almost like a 2-year-old.
Success was measured in syllables, and moments were like mountains.
When you can't think of a day at a time, take it moment by the time. And there were times when I had to get through this minute. Just get me through this minute, God.
But in ways big and small, again and again, Doug defied expectations.
He just kept proving everybody wrong. I hated to do it, but I was able to compare. I would look at that person in that room, and the wife would come every day, and she'd brush his teeth, and he was the same every day. But my husband wasn't. Every day was a little bit different. My husband was walking, and my husband began to talk. So I just kept taking any little bit of positive, and I just focused on that positive.
In a series of operations, doctors worked to rebuild Doug's broken face, harvesting bone from his leg to replace his jaw and tissue from his leg to replace his lower palate and cheek. But it was clear early on that no amount of surgery would make him look like he once had.
He went to the mirror and he looked, and I could just see the expression on his face was, not good.
When I looked in the mirror, it was just the I guess, magnitude of the injury. It obviously was disfiguring, and noticed I didn't have my finger, noticed that teeth were gone. So I think one of my initial fears, which was really irrational, was whether she was going to stick around.
Are we okay? I think is how he phrased it. Are we going to be okay? And no matter how many times I kept saying, we're going to be fine, we're going to get through this, just wait and see. I promise you, we're going to do this together. I don't think he really believed me.
There was another question that haunted him, since he had no memory of how he was hurt.
I guess you could just say, I was worried, was I a coward and got hurt, or was I fighting and doing what I was there to do and got hurt? And that was probably my biggest concern coming out of that injury.
That question was answered in August of 2010 when Doug's unit was welcomed home from Afghanistan. His doctors allowed him to travel from Texas to Columbus to greet his brothers in arms.
The doctors, they had their hands full with Doug. They had their hands full because I'm telling you right now, he was a soldier's soldier all the way through that process.
It was the first time he'd seen them since Afghanistan, and the first time he was able to hear firsthand about the day that changed and nearly ended his life.
He goes through months of grueling surgeries, and the first and only thing he's worried about is, hey, how did I hurt the team? I let the team down. It truly didn't. That couldn't be farther from the truth.
They were back on American soil, reunited with their families. But Doug's fellow soldiers say their work was unfinished.
That wasn't our homecoming. Our homecoming is when Doug got released from the hospital finally.
The mission's not done. Our mission's not complete until Doug is done and home.
A day that wouldn't come for another year.
After 487 days and more than a dozen surgeries, last October the Reeds finally returned home to Jackson. Their family here at the fire department, in fact much of the community, turned out to welcome them. A homecoming befitting a hero for a man who doesn't see himself as one. Before his friends and family, Doug was awarded a Purple Heart. For the men who fought beside him and fought to save him, this was mission accomplished.
We came home as a team -1 until Doug got here. So we are home. We're mission complete now.
Just go ahead and drag it out a little bit. Face.
Faith.
Good. Very good.
Today, Doug's recovery is still
Faith.
a work in progress.
Ready to run?
Sure.
Okay, let's go.
Rebuilding his strength.
Go ahead and make a fist.
And learning to work with his new features.
And straighten.
And the attention they draw.
You gotta love little kids because they just ask, hey, what happened to you? It never bothered me that people look at me because it's just a natural thing. I would just rather you ask. Just ask me what happened if that's what you want to know.
As in so many military families, there are the scars you see and those you don't.
He sleeps great at night. He doesn't have flashbacks.
How do you sleep at night?
I don't. I've just recently begun sleeping a lot better. It's difficult. Different things spark different emotions. I don't like talking about myself, as you can see. So it's a journey, and we all have to journey on it together.
There have been times where I wondered for her if it would have been just as easy if I hadn't survived. Her wound and scars have almost been continual. She had to deal with the trauma of the injury, then recovery, and now the appointments for therapies and everything that goes along with that.
They thought they knew the risks of the military when they signed on, but today they will tell you they were wrong.
Most people think that when you go to war, you're going to die. My mom didn't want me to join the Army in 1983 because her son was going to join the Army and go die. So we talked about that. What you don't consider is, what if you don't die? What about living with the aftermath of injury?
That's your wife over there?
My heart fills with pride whenever I watch him because a lesser man would not be doing this. A lesser man wouldn't have been sitting here.
Today, Doug Reed's military career is coming to an end, but he's far from done serving.
I want to just get integrated back into the team.
He's back at the firehouse in Jackson.
Back home. Really, honestly, it's something I love doing.
Having faced the fire of combat, ready to once again put his life on the line. It's not the journey he planned.
And he said, your husband's not going to make it till Friday.
It's not the outcome anyone predicted.
He's actually a walking miracle in my mind.
It's not the life Doug Reed used to have.
It's the new face of freedom.
From small-town Ohio to a battlefield half a world away to the brink of death.
It's just really no more than it's a chapter in my life, and it's just a turn of the page.
And finally, back home.
Hey there.
Hey, sweetie pie.
How you doing?
I'm doing good.
Good.
How was your time?
Great. Good to see you.
Glenn says Doug Reed resumed his duties as chief of the Jackson Fire Department on January 1st. Ty Henry, the soldier you saw with Reed on the hood of that Humvee, is nominated for a Silver Star for his actions that day.
You'll find much more on this story, including more photos from Doug's recovery and Jana's online journal on 10tv.com/10TV News Presents.
Well, this February marks 50 years since he became the first American to orbit the Earth.
Next, John Glenn gives us an inside look at the flight that catapulted him into the history books.
Godspeed, John Glenn.
Are you aware of the danger and are you apprehensive? Yeah, I call it constructive apprehension.
How John Glenn's hair-raising flight could have cost him his life. Inside the life of an American legend. Next on 10TV News Presents.